We have all seen what these campaigns are and how different they are. They are so incredibly dissimilar. We have on one side Kamala Harris and Governor Walz, Vice President Harris and Governor Walz, telling Americans about the joy of progress, about the joy of freedom, and bringing the case for it, talking about the various issues. Versus on the other side, we have seen very little policy other than Project 2025 or Agenda 47 or any other name that you want to put on authoritarianism and fascism. So we'll just go down the line of the various issues that matter, right? And I will start first with democracy. It matters that we preserve our republic, our constitution, and our democracy. We know that Donald Trump has said that he wants to terminate parts of the Constitution. We know that Donald Trump has said that he would like a bloodbath if he doesn't win. We have seen Donald Trump make a mockery of the courts with allies in the court system by upending decades and decades of precedent and upending the lives of people and the face of how we uh, impose liability on American citizens for their crimes. And so the preservation of democracy is the large playing field on which we're playing because given, and we'll talk about this, given what Donald Trump proposes, it would be an end to democracy as we know it. It would be an end to a lot of the programs and norms of American society that we have taken for granted for decades and decades and decades. So we've seen that firsthand. So the first issue is the right to choose. It's a woman's right to choose. We saw in Dobbs how a corrupt Supreme Court upended a precedent that gave women the right to choose. It shifted it to the states, and now 1 in 3 states have bans on abortion. And on this issue, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, with a blue Congress, fully intend on restoring Roe versus Wade and codifying a woman's right to choose. What's the story on the other side? They want a national abortion ban. Donald Trump and JD Vance want a national abortion ban. They want to tell women how and when they should have their pregnancy. They want the state to tell a woman and her doctor how to deal with reproductive health. So that's the difference when it comes to one of the core things that was taken away from American women under Dobbs by a court that Donald Trump is proud of. And he has said many times that he's proud to have helped, not helped, he's proud to have overturned Roe versus Wade. So don't forget that. And I believe that women will not forget that. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that the Supreme Court and the Republican Party made by making an enemy of every woman. And Vice President Harris has said many times that it is not acceptable that our daughters have less rights than our mothers. So it needs to be restored. Roe versus Wade needs to be restored, and the Harris campaign pledges to do so. Then there's SCOTUS reform. And restoring Roe versus Wade is part of SCOTUS reform because it will be overruling SCOTUS's Dobbs decision and codifying Roe by legislation and then signed into law by President Kamala Harris. So that's why it's so important for us to keep the momentum going and ensure that we give President Kamala Harris a blue Congress, so both chambers, so codifying Roe happens in the first 100 days of Vice President, at that time, President Harris's tenure. Then other SCOTUS reform, ethics reforms, and codifying ethics reforms that are enforceable on the Supreme Court. That could include term limits. That could include uh, enforceable punishment and sanctions for ethical violations over which the Supreme Court itself will not have jurisdiction because it is being judged in that particular case. So that legislation is very important, and that can only be we can only get that with a blue Congress and President Kamala Harris and Vice President Tim Walz, because Tim Walz may end up becoming the tie-breaking vote in those situations, depending on how each of the chambers of Congress go in this election. And that's why this election is critical for more than one reason. Then there is the immunity decision that SCOTUS came out with. So Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and that and the Harris Walz campaign has been clear that there will have to be reform done in the immunity decision. There has to be legislation passed and signed into law that rescinds a former president's near total immunity in cases where he is acting in his official capacity, even the outer perimeters of it, without any consideration to the idea that there is no immunity for a president or a former president written in the Constitution. So that is important, and that is something that the Harris campaign has said, and that is President Biden's vision, and I believe that it will move forward to be the same with President Harris. What's on the other side? Well, we have the defendant, we have Donald Trump, well, sorry, the petitioner in the immunity case, which is an interlocutory case related to the criminal case in DC, which is going to come back around this month. So he is the defendant slash petitioner in the immunity case. So of course he wants that immunity, and he wants all of his cases dismissed, all of his criminal cases dismissed. And were he to win, he will definitely pardon himself and stop the investigations, whichever way he wants to handle it, from going forward. How he will handle Georgia RICO case and New York case, should he win, which is unlikely, I don't know. We'll have to see about that. So that immunity reform needs to happen, and that is what the Harris campaign has committed to, versus the person who wants immunity for former presidents, mainly himself, not anybody else. Then there's the Chevron doctrine. The Chevron doctrine was a doctrine that gave regulatory agencies like the EPA and the FDA deference in explaining, in assessing and implementing regulation that would keep our waters clean, our air safe, our food and drugs safe. And those are just two regulatory agencies among many. So the Supreme Court in Loper Bright said that, you know, the courts don't have to give regulatory agencies deference in how they regulate all the various things that Americans come into contact with every single day, like air, water, the food we eat, the drugs, the prescription drugs, or even the over-the-counter drugs that we take. There are regulations that govern the safety of these things, and Chevron has put that into the overruling of Chevron has put that into sort of disarray. And this tags along with also the climate policy, with how are we going to weigh energy production with climate policy, That also comes into play later, and I'll talk about those issues. So there has to be reform in terms of how regulatory agencies should get deference, and that courts must give deference to how regulatory agencies and the entity who is coming to challenge those regulatory agency regulations has the burden of proving that those regulations go beyond the scope of what the regulatory agencies have the power to do. So that's uh, another thing that is starkly different between the two, because the Supreme Court needs to be brought to heel. It has become rogue. So then comes the domestic policies and the foreign policy. In domestic policy, you have everything from inflation to infrastructure to Social Security, Medicare to education. The Harris and Walz campaign has put out a plan about bringing costs down. It has put out a plan about investing in affordable housing, 3+ million units. It is going to carry forward the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and any other, the gun reform legislation, which is needs to be worked on to ban assault rifles completely from uh, the U.S. commercial market, consumer market. And that is the position of the Harris-Walz campaign, is that they will continue with the infrastructure, that they will bring inflation down, that they will build affordable housing, that they will expand the working family and grow the wealth of the middle class, because that is where the strength of America comes from. On the other side, we have Donald Trump, who talked about infrastructure for 4 years but never did anything about it. It was during his tenure and mismanagement of COVID that there there was a near crash of our economy, and inflation started from that point and went up throughout President Biden's tenure because of the mess that President Biden was given. And then President Biden's policies, energy policies, and the Inflation Reduction Act helped bring inflation down, where today inflation is where it was pre-pandemic. It needs to go down further. And that is what the Harris campaign pledges to do. In terms of Social Security and Medicare and these programs, these social programs that hold the country together, the Harris-Walz campaign want to reinforce and keep those programs going and keep those programs funded. Whereas on the other side, they want to do the Trump and Vance campaign want to do away with Social Security and Medicare. Then there is the issue of education. And Governor Walz said it best about education and the absurdity of the voucher program and private schools that Donald Trump is talking about, and as he talks about doing away with the Department of Education. So Governor Walz explained to all of us the importance of the public education system, because for small towns of 400 people, small towns even of 30,000 people, it would become increasingly difficult for towns of those sizes to have education available for free, which is public education K through 12. And that would end that for those communities. And that is what the Trump Vance campaign wants to do. They want to end the Department of Education and turn education into a private thing and provide vouchers for people to go to different private schools. It will do away with so many protections that public schools have, and public schools hold up the responsibility of treating people the same, largely because there are lawsuits about that as well. But imagine what would happen if the Department of Education was taken out completely, which is what the Trump Vance ticket wants to do. And obviously, that is not what the Harris campaign wants to do. So then we come to foreign policy. In terms of Ukraine, the Harris campaign will keep up the foreign policy of defending the democracy that Ukraine holds so dear, that they have held back the behemoth that is the Russian military for over 2 years now. And that is where our foreign policy lies. It lies also with having a two-state solution in Israel and Palestine, and working to have a ceasefire there and getting it done as soon as possible. It is about taming the posturing of competition and adversity in the South China Sea with Taiwan and China. It is about reining in authoritarianism across the world so that democracy may flourish. Understand that democracy is about the people, it's about us. Autocracy is about one person. Oligarchy is about the ring of people who sit around that one person, praising him and funding him, and taking all of the money from the working people and then leaving them with nothing, not even the rights to be able to protest properly, as we see in Russia today. So, in terms of foreign policy, there is a vast difference, because Donald Trump would give Ukraine to Russia. Donald Trump doesn't have a plan in the Middle East. Donald Trump would pull out any stationed troops in the South China Sea that is stabilizing that area. It will, because it won't care about the plight of the other people. They would just bring American soldiers back, and it would have a positive impact in the sense that we don't take responsibility for holding the world together, when the truth is that our country has a huge responsibility of protecting democracies and giving the people who are the underdogs the benefit of help, because they want to be part of a democracy, a democratic society. And that is important on a fundamental level, because as the world frees, so freeze economies, and so they become capitalist economies, and they flourish. And China, as an example of a rich country, there is a level of stagnation in China at the moment that America would consider to be a recession. But that recession is not anywhere near the United States, despite the fact that Donald Trump has lied about it and talked about the Kamala crash. And when the market does better, oh, it's because I may become president again. Well, that's not how the market works. The market works on stability. So if you have stability in government, if you have stability in regulatory agencies, if you have stability in basic, the fundamental liberties, then the market does well. And I believe that the market is going to be volatile from now until November, and now until President Harris is sworn in on January 20th, 2025. We're going to see a certain level of volatility. And a lot of it will have to do with Donald Trump's false narrative. It'll have to do with the fear that Donald Trump instills in people and incites them into lawlessness, about America being a shithole country, about other people pouring in from all the other countries in the southern border. The immigration policy of the Biden administration is working because President Biden had to sign an executive order limiting the amount of people coming to the southern border and coming into the United States to 2,500, and then stopping the entry of people. And that was part of legislation that Donald Trump killed. He killed that by not letting that get to the vote. And that is the immigration policy that Donald Trump has. He had 4 years to build a wall, and he never did. He then went and sabotaged the border security bill that would have that would have gotten the things done that now President Biden's executive order is doing. So what will happen if Harris comes into office? She will keep that border security policy and that executive order in place until there is legislation, border security legislation, that a blue Congress can pass and give to Kamala Harris to sign into law. Then there's energy policy and the climate policies. What the Biden administration has done is allocate the vast parts of America as protected land because of the climate policy, because we have to follow and use temperance in how we go about our energy and climate policy. And even still, the United States is today the number one producer of oil in the entire world. And that is how President Biden has been able to bring inflation down faster by balancing those two, climate policy with energy policy, and how it's important to balance the two. What's the other side? What is Donald Trump's motto? Drill, drill, drill. Donald Trump has no concern for climate policy whatsoever. So it would cause a disbalance in our ecosystem. And they also want to do away with FEMA, which responds to extreme weather occurrences all around the country. So when it comes to climate policy and energy policy, we have Kamala Harris and Walz maintaining the balanced approach and trying to get climate legislation and energy production legislation alongside with immigration legislation so that these policies may be codified into law, while on the other side, Donald just wants to drill, baby, drill. You know, these are the various differences. And on these policy positions, we have Vice President Harris coming out clearly talking about these issues and talking about where work needs to be done, whereas Donald Trump has not come up with policy positions other than shut the southern border and drill, baby, drill, and then Project 2025 that does everything from gutting career civil servants and filling the ranks of regulatory agencies with loyalists, and then going after private citizens and people who Donald Trump perceives to be his enemies. That is how Donald Trump wants to use, that is Donald Trump's policy platform. So with that said, there's also one last thing I want to talk about. The press and many others from Donald Trump's side have this thing. Oh, why is, if everything is good with the Kamala Harris campaign, why is she taking interviews? Well, the point of interviews with the press is to get a point across to the American people. And the Harris-Walz campaign is doing a fantastic job of reaching out to the American people and getting the message out to the American people of how they will preserve our democracy, how they will invest in our middle class, how they will keep balancing the various concerns in domestic and foreign policy. And they're doing it on stage. They're doing it when they're asked by reporters that are following them on the campaign trail, and they're actually answering the questions substantively. On the flip side, Donald Trump is sitting and doing interviews, and he's giving press conferences where he's being asked questions that he does not answer. So while he is blabbering on about the same old things like Hannibal Lecter and how to pronounce Vice President Harris's name, it's Kamala or Kamala. You say it however you want to say it, Kamala. Spell it out, Kamala. It's that simple. And if you decide that you want to, disrespect her for her name, go for it, because that's only going to backfire on you. Every single attack that has come up from making a mockery of her, laughing to her ethnicity, multi-ethnicity, to her questioning of her father being some sort of an extreme leftist economics professor. He's an economics professor. Economics professors does having an economic professor dad doesn't mean that you have those economic values instilled in you. You are an independent person, and your economic policy is to work the middle class and the working Americans to grow their wealth. And that is your platform. And obviously, Donald Trump does not like that platform because Donald Trump has given big oil and big corporations promises that he will take their taxes down were he to come back into office. And that's why they're giving him the money. The momentum on Kamala Harris's side is entirely people driven. The movement of Walz and Harris, you can see the realness of their conversations. You can see the issues that they bring up and they talk about, and Americans can relate to it. Everything from road trip talk to music talk to talking about our democracy and how important it is for us to stick together, to unite, and to keep our republic and to reform where we need to reform and move forward. We are not going back. That is the motto of the Harris-Walz campaign. When the motto of the Donald Trump and J.D. Vance campaign is "Make America Great Again." Again, well, America was doing quite well with Roe as the rule of law of the land, and Donald Trump took that away from women. And don't ever, ever forget that. There are many men, including myself, who were highly offended by that, by the fact that women's autonomy was taken away. And we are eagerly waiting for the new Congress to come in and for the new Congress to legislate, a blue Congress, and President Harris to sign it into law. And if needed, the President of the Senate, Vice President Walz to be the tiebreaker in those laws if needed. But the need for us to understand that we remain the underdogs. We are the underdogs not because we have not because the vice president is running. We are the underdogs because on the issues, on the rights, the rogue Supreme Court and Republican Party has been successful in tearing apart some of the things that hold our country together, whether that be the right to choose or the deference of regulatory agencies to determine what is safe for the American people to consume with clean water and air and safe food and prescription drugs, and the lowering of these costs. And that's also another thing that Kamala Harris wants to do, is to lower costs for medicine for all people, not just for the senior citizens, but for all people. And there is no talk of that in Donald Trump's camp. It's just drill, baby, drill. It's just close down the southern border, And then there's Project 2025, dissolve the education system, do away with FEMA, do away with the social networks, do away with the social infrastructure that holds us together, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So in answering these questions, I want to end with is that Harris and Walz are answering the questions. They're not having press conferences because they are having mini press conferences right where they are campaigning after their campaigns are over. It's not like they're just walking away. They're answering questions. And on the other side, even with the same questions or easier questions for Donald Trump keeps evading the question and talking about political persecution and crowd sizes and whatever else nonsense that he wants to talk about. So think about this as we go through the Democratic National Convention. And these are the differences between the two. One side wants unity, the other side wants division. Harris, Walz wants us to be united and wants us to move forward and not look back. And Trump Vance wants to look back and take our country back to the 50s and even before that and impose an authoritarian regime where our individual rights will slowly be taken away. And this is real. It is not hyperbolic. Donald Trump has tried to do a lot of it, and Donald Trump's Project 2025 and Agenda 47 and whatever else you put on fascism has put that out, that those are the policies that they want to impose on the people. We need to believe them. We need to see the threat for what it is, and we need to get out and vote. So sign up somebody else to vote. If you're check your registration, I already have. I'm waiting for my ballot. So let's vote and make sure that we have a blue Congress and make sure that we have President Kamala Harris and Vice President Tim Walz to see our country through and move us forward. With that said, thank you so much. Please like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.